Welcome to the second of these Chaplains chatters from our chaplaincy team as we talk to different people about their experiences, their beliefs, their story of their life and what it might have to say to us. So we thought we'd start with our chaplaincy team because that's easier. We can talk to each other. We're quite used to talking to each other. We often do that a lot of the time. So I'm talking today to my colleague Joe Parkin, who's a chaplain at Park campus, and we're going to be talking a little bit about mental health and mindfulness, particularly with it being Mental Health Awareness Week this week. So Joe, first of all, how long have you been a chaplain at the university for?
So I'm coming to the end now of my 10th year at the university, and this is a very strange way of ending 10 years at the university. This current situation is not how I'd envisaged the end of my decade, but there you go. Yeah,
there we go. That's where we are. And what sort of things did you do before you were a chaplain? Probably quite a lot of things, so just, give us a flavour.
So old that I've done loads of things. So when I first went to university, I thought I was going to be a teacher. So I started off training to be a teacher. And then I realised that I was drawn to those kids who kind of sat in the corner of classrooms, throwing things. And they always took my attention. I just wanted to be with them because they were so much more interesting. So I realised that probably being a classroom teacher wasn't my perfect vocation. So I then jumped to doing a straight degree, and after I graduated I started to explore all kinds of things really. I travelled for a year after university and I thought I was going to end up working in international development, but sadly no one wanted me. So I came back here and started working for various charities. So I worked for Barnardo's to start off with, and then I kind of settled in working with middle-aged homeless men with mental health problems, and that was such a great job, and I did that for a little while. And I think after I'd done that for a while, I realised that social work was probably the thing that I was called to. So I trained to be a social worker, and I thought I was going to be predominantly working in mental health. But actually, just because of one of the placements that I ended up doing when I was doing my training, I ended up working in a therapeutic family centre, working with families where there'd been a history of all kinds of different abuse. And it was in that glorious era where the Labour government was investing lots and lots of money in things. So we were able to work with families for really long periods of time, sometimes up to a year. And the whole family would come and live residentially for a little while, and we'd do kind of parenting sessions and therapy sessions, all kinds of different things. And we were working with some really kind of tough families with all kinds of issues in their lives. But actually it was one of the most hopeful places that I've ever worked. And it instilled in me this idea that actually, given enough kindness and enough kind of holding, people can make the most amazing changes in their lives. So I loved doing that. It was fantastic. But then my husband decided he was going to train for ordination. So we moved out of London up to Birmingham, and I started having children. And it was much more difficult to do child protection work when you've got a young family. So then I guess for a while I started working in church settings. I did kind of youth and families work in churches. And then I was kind of exploring the possibility of ordination for myself, so going into the church full time. And it was suggested to me that I went and had a chat with one of the hospital chaplains, who I still know, Katie McClure, who some people will know. And I went to speak to her, and she told me about hospital chaplaincy. And it was a brilliant conversation. And as my hand was literally on the door handle to leave her office, she said to me, "Do you know, I think there might be a job going at the university." And so I came back home and I Googled this job at the university, and the closing date was at midnight that day, that very day. So I didn't really think about it very much. I just chucked in an application, not thinking there was any way that I'd even get an interview. And here I am 10 years later. So wow. It felt like it almost came, I didn't go looking for it, really. It almost came looking for me. And so, it's been a really good fit.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So I was saying at the last Chaplain's Chatter, I've only been at university 2.5 years, but I know how much you have contributed to the work of the chaplaincy over those 10 years and how much you've built it up, which has been a tremendous gift to the university and to the chaplaincy. And I guess some of your previous experiences, although they were quite different, have sort of fed into that in some sort of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So I guess one of the things that I struggled with as a social worker was my faith was a really important part of my life, but certainly in the way that social work was constructed back then, there was absolutely no way of overtly sharing faith at all. And in fact, the setting that I worked in was quite hostile to anything to do with faith. So even though I loved the work that I was doing, I felt that there was always quite a chunk of myself that I had to keep, removed in some way. And I guess one of the things that I love about the work that I've been doing the last 10 years is that in some ways it's similar. I mean, often we're working with people who are having a really tough time in their lives and who are, exploring things, but also struggling for a whole variety of different reasons. But now it feels like I can use all of myself. I don't have to keep part of myself separate. So it feels, I guess, for me, it feels like a fulfillment of what I was doing as a social worker. I'm able to do that more fully in my chaplaincy role.
Yeah. Lovely, thank you. And that really leads us into mainly what we're going to talk about. So the sort of folks you've come across who are having a really tough time. We know that mental health and the mental health and well-being of students has been a big issue in universities in the last few years. And I just wondered if you could say about how you've noticed any changes, what your experiences have been of working with students in this whole area of mental health and well-being and the issues that students may have.
I mean, I guess I'm biased, but I think one of the things that our university does really, really well is support students who are struggling for a whole variety of reasons. So it might be mental health, or it might be kind of disability issues or finance issues or whatever. And it feels like, even though we're quite a small university, we punch above our weight quite a lot in the support that is offered to students. So I think even when I came in 10 years ago, the mental health and wellbeing provision at the university was really strong. But I guess what we've all noticed over the last 10 years is that the numbers of students accessing those services has grown year on year and year. And it feels like even though those services keep being expanded and the offer to students keeps being made larger, it's almost like we can't quite keep up with the demand that there is out there. So that feels like a big thing to me. And I think, that's partly for very, very good reasons. So one of the things that certainly happened since I started working in mental health social work is that people are so much happier to talk about issues around mental health now. I think, all that stigma that used to be there kind of 20 years ago really has diminished so much over that period, that now people are willing to talk about things, very happy to talk about things. People aren't worried about labelling or any of those issues that used to be around quite a lot in the past. So I think that's a really positive thing. I guess, and this is where I'm going to sound a little bit controversial, is the only thing that I would kind of worry about now, and this is less so in a university setting and more what I observe in some school settings, is that because there's so much talk about mental health and well-being in social media, for example, it can sometimes with younger people become almost not exactly a badge of honour, but it becomes something that people almost feel that they want to share with lots and lots and lots of people in a way that isn't necessarily helpful. And again, I think I'm more talking about secondary school settings than I am university settings, but obviously we see a little bit of that coming into university. So I know that's probably quite a controversial point of view,
but in a way, it leads on to what we're going to talk about, because so there's people can talk about their mental health and their mental health issues, and they may get mutual support from that, and that's, I think, one of the things we offer in sense of our welcome in our spaces, to allow people space to support each other. And the university, as you say, offers really good support in various ways: counsellors, mental health and wellbeing advisors, and so on. But there's a particular practice or area of practice that I know you've focused on, which is about people perhaps making a step of doing something which will support their mental health and well-being, rather than just talking about it, actually taking some action in the area of mindfulness. So mindfulness has also become a big buzzword over recent years, and mindfulness appears in all sorts of different settings. I wondered, how did you first come across mindfulness, and why did you think this is something that I want to pursue?
Okay. So I guess if I go back in my own life, the kind of journey of faith that I've been on myself, I guess, has over the years led me towards more contemplative and meditative practices. So my own prayer life is a lot of the time quite wordless these days. It's a lot of the time is me sitting and being aware of God's presence and using words in a very sparing way. So there are some parallels between that kind of contemplative approach to Christian prayer and some of the attitudes that are practiced within mindfulness. So for me, I think it's probably been around for quite a long time, but I wouldn't have attached the name mindfulness to it. So I guess I first came across mindfulness in its secular setting, probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago. So one of my closest friends is a clinical psychologist, and she was at the time working with young people who'd been excluded from mainstream school. And we always talk a lot about the work that we do. And she started to talk about some of the interventions that she was starting to use with those young people. And it was this buzz thing called mindfulness. And the more she talked about it, the more I thought, oh, that's quite interesting. And she did some training in it, and the training was really helpful. And then I guess I started to do more research into it, and I realised that I could attend a course locally. So I went along and did the course for myself. And that's an 8-week course is how it's generally taught. And I found that just incredibly helpful at recognising some things within myself. But instead of needing to, talk to someone else about them as you would do in a therapeutic setting, I guess mindfulness was giving me some of the tools to work through some of those issues on my own. And I guess, one of the biggest things about mindfulness is just the practice of accepting what is. And I think so much of what we do as human beings is when things are difficult in our life, we try and push against them, we try and push them away, or we try and distract ourselves from them, or we kind of brace against them, a crash position. And there's something just about the kind of very gentle approach of mindfulness, which is about accepting things as they are. You might not necessarily like them, but just accepting what is. And I think that fitted for me really well with the kind of contemplative aspect of prayer that I'm used to. So for me, very much it was a personal practice to start off with, long before I thought of using it in a university setting. But then eventually I started to feel confident enough in my own use that I thought I'd quite like to offer this to other people. And so I was able to persuade our wonderful head of student services to fund me to do a training course, which I did, I guess, about 4 or 5 years ago now. And then I came back, having done my training course, thinking, oh God, everybody will really want me to teach mindfulness to them now. And for about a year, I was saying to people, oh, I could do some mindfulness sessions for you. Nobody was really interested at all. Couldn't quite understand why. And then probably after about a year or 18 months, suddenly, I guess it coincided with mindfulness just becoming much more of a buzzword generally. Suddenly people discovered that I was offering it, and people started to take it up. So I started really small, just doing little groups in the faith space at Park campus. And then I started to offer it as part of some of the academic courses. And then I started offering a short course to staff. And so over the past, I guess, 3.5 years, it's really started to, the interest in it and the, you know, the openness to it, I guess, has really grown.
And what sort of responses have you had from people who've been along to the sessions or taken one of the short courses or staff or so on? What do you think that they've been getting out of it that's been really helpful?
So I think people, one of the great things about mindfulness is I think that people can enter it at all kinds of different levels. And so I think just purely coming along to a 20-minute session once a week and doing some breathing practices and talking a little bit about being kind to yourself, I think that's great for everybody. So you can take it just at that level and just come and do 15 minutes a week, and that's great. I think in terms of maybe any mental health difficulties that people are having, that only scratches the surface. So I think if people want to really use it as an effective tool of change in their lives, it takes a little bit more commitment than that. So some of the people I've worked with have really taken that commitment seriously. And so alongside coming along to the weekly sessions, people have done other things in their own time, whether that be listening to Headspace or any of the other fantastic apps that you can get. But people can choose which level they want to approach it at. Yeah, and I think the received wisdom is for it really to make an impact in people's lives. People need to be practicing mindfulness for about 10 minutes a day, a minimum of 10 minutes a day. And if you can find a rhythm and a routine of practicing mindfulness for just 10 minutes a day, you will after a while start to notice some changes, some benefits from that.
And I remember, I think just a few weeks before the lockdown, you met up with somebody who'd been a student. I think they came into the chapel, or you were just talking to them, and they talked about the importance that the practice had. Do you remember that?
No.
Brilliant. So I think it was a student you hadn't seen for a number of years.
Okay.
And then they just said to you, actually, since they've been along to the sessions, they were ex-students, they've been using those practices every day. Do you remember now?
Yes.
Yeah, and it obviously been really transformational and important for them. So all these, it's one of those things that we do, isn't it? We offer things. We don't know how they'll land with people or what exactly will happen. But yeah. What perhaps is happening is that there's a lot of people who've had experience of using mindfulness practices, who are then off, as members of staff or students or ex-students, wherever they are, but this is perhaps being built into their way of being in the world.
Yes, and I think I always try and be honest with people that actually I'm teaching it very much at an introductory level. So even when I'm, teaching a group of staff, we only have 4 sessions together, which actually isn't very long at all. So to try and effect any long-term change in our own lives in just 4 sessions is that's probably not that realistic. But I guess what I hope is that I'm just planting seeds. So I guess that's what you're saying, really, that you offer people some tools. People can then choose to what extent they want to take those up. And then maybe people don't use it for a year or 2 years, but maybe then they hit a bit of a wall in their lives and they think, oh, actually, I remember, it wasn't that difficult to do mindfulness. Maybe I'll just kind of build in a little bit of that again. Yes. And so that's what I'm hoping. I'm not an expert and I'm not teaching in any kind of clinical way at all, but I'm just kind of throwing out a few gentle suggestions that people can have a go at if they'd like to. And it's certainly not, I always say to people, it's not a magic wand. Doing this is not going to make all the issues in your life, go away. It's not going to turn it into rainbows and unicorns. But it could just be one thing that you build into all the other things you do, like eating well and taking exercise and things. It could be just one aspect of that whole kind of smorgasbord of well-being that could be helpful. And it certainly won't do you any harm. That's the thing.
and as you said, although different religious traditions have a connection with it, it's actually available. It's very inclusive of everybody. It doesn't rely on any particular faith or worldview. It's a practice.
Yes,
isn't it?
That's right. I think when I'm teaching it, one of the things that I say is that I particularly love about mindfulness, that actually all of this wisdom that we're drawing on is really ancient wisdom. It's there, like you say, in all of our kind of great religious traditions. It's been around for hundreds and thousands of years in some cases. And it's not complicated. It's not rocket science. It's really quite straightforward. It's taking time to be in the present moment, to stop that kind of whirlwind of thoughts, just to kind of allow that to settle a little bit, to be as we are, and to bring gentle kindness to our own experience in the same way as we would do with other people's experience. And that's there as ancient wisdom in all of our traditions. But the great thing about kind of secular mindfulness is that there's all this history, and then there's modern neuroscience and psychology and all the insights from that, and they've kind of met in the middle. And the insights from both of those traditions really complement each other. So I think I find that quite reassuring, because it's wisdom coming from two different directions, really.
Yeah, great. And just as we come towards the end, of course, at the moment, as we started with saying, it's a very different situation. So sadly, people can't come along and attend mindfulness sessions as they normally would. But I know that you're still offering resources in different ways. Do you want to just say a little bit about what you're offering? And also any other resources you think would be good for people to latch into?
Yeah, of course. So we're offering on our chaplaincy Facebook page something called Monday Midday Mindfulness, which is just me doing a very kind of introductory level mindfulness practice. It's supposed to be about 20 minutes, but I usually talk too long, so it often goes on for about half an hour. So it's half an hour on a Monday. And that's available on our Facebook page, but I've also created a kind of a separate group as well, which is called Mindful Moments. And on there are the videos of the practices that I'm teaching, but there are also links to lots of other things that might be helpful for people. So some things that people might want to investigate. I mean, the thing that I'm probably the biggest fan of is Headspace, which is an app that you can get on your phone. And in normal times, it costs quite a lot of money to join Headspace. But at the moment, during lockdown and during the coronavirus crisis, then lots of that is being made available for free. So I just suggest, if anyone's interested, they just have a go, look at that app. There's some really beautiful little animations, which are just a minute long every morning, and they can pop into your phone. And it's a lovely way of starting the day. So I guess that would be the thing that I would recommend more than anything else. And then I guess if I could, the one practice that I would recommend more than any other, and this isn't a formal kind of sitting and breathing practice, this is just it's called everyday mindfulness. So at the end of each day, if you can just take a few moments to reflect over your day, just pick out 5 things in your day that have caused you some pleasure, some joy, where you've observed a little bit of kindness. And at first, it can be really hard to find those things, especially if you're having a tough time. It can be hard to find 5 things in your day that you feel thankful for. But what people discover is that the longer they do this practice for, the more they start to notice that actually, even in the most difficult of times, there are moments of beauty and joy and kindness, that if we can just turn up the volume on those and give our attention to them a little bit more, they can start to really change the balance of what our life feels like. Brilliant. So really simple practice, 5 fingers of mindfulness it's called, 5 fingers of gratitude.
You did great. You managed to shoehorn a little bit of mindfulness teaching into the conversation. That's great. And so thank you very much, Jo. Thank you for all you're doing, and thank you for sharing with us about mindfulness. And I'm sure that will be helpful to people. So I do encourage you, if you're able to access the Facebook page, to look at some of the practices. I've used some of the practices that Jo has shared, and I found it very helpful. And as well as the actual practice, she always ends with a beautiful poem to share with us. So that's lovely to see as well. And do look at the other resources that are there. And I hope you find that as a real support for your own mental health and well-being in this Mental Health Awareness Week, and an ongoing way as we all deal with the particular situation that we're in at the moment. So that's the end of our chaplaincy chatter for today. There will be another conversation coming soon your way, and it will be posted on Facebook as usual. But very good to have you with us today. Thank you.